It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
Because it's not about us, it's about you, it's about the authors. And we talked a lot this morning about diversity, Karina. You mentioned it. Mrs. Ambassador, you talked about Ambassador. We spoke about the impacts of colonialism. And I think it was very important what you said earlier, that the narrative, the storytelling is part of the identity. And even having, what was it, 400 years of Spanish occupation?
330 years.
We have to be very correct, yeah, 330.
50 years of American.
And 50 years American, and in between some Japanese soldiers in Chinese and yeah, Dutch, everybody was there. But still, it's 135 languages, which I've never seen before, so many languages. And what I also never heard of, actually, is climate fiction. I think this is a new genre for me. Yeah, so this is quite important. You have to tell us a bit about it. And we've learned about your background from Ines, and as a journalist, and now you're sitting in front of journalists. Are you on a mission somehow?
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for that question, and thank you for reminding me that I do have a journalism background, because sometimes I forget. But being reminded that I have a journalism background also reminds me that the work that I do is nothing compared to what brave journalists are doing out there. And it's important to me that I remind myself through my book and through my work about the importance of journalism, not just to me, but to literature, and how my own book owes a lot to journalism. And I think, even the word or the phrase climate fiction, I think it came from journalists and not literary workers and not writers first. And there must be a reason why they came up with the phrase climate fiction. I did not deliberately set out to write a work of climate fiction. I just wanted to tell a story, and I wanted to use whatever journalism background and creative writing background I had to tell, a story that people might be interested in.
What I also liked about the book, and as you said, I was lucky to get a pre-copy. Yeah, the book is only available for a few days now here in Germany. And I think you have very good translators, by the way. Yeah, so this is
Thank you. I'm very lucky.
Very important. And when we mentioned, I always like this phrase I heard a few weeks ago, that translators are ambassadors of diversity, yeah, which brings us back to diversity. But again, the book starts off with a vivid description of the smell of do not, of decay, Verwesung. So olfaction, der Geruch spielt eine große Rolle. It plays a pivotal role in triggering memory and trauma. Yeah, so you're using, on the one hand, you're using interviews as a journalist, which is your background, and on the other hand, this is sort of a semiotic thing, yeah, to use this taste as well. Where did this come from?
I think it came from a couple of things. First of all, smell was the one sensory experience that first hit me when I went home to Tacloban, where I grew up, like 5 or 6 days after the super typhoon made landfall. And it was just so overwhelming. And it was something that you could not close your senses to. I mean, you could close your eyes to the visuals, you could cover your ears, right, to the sound or to the silence, but there was no way of dealing with the smell. And to me, that was very powerful. It was something that stayed with me after, weeks even. But also I wanted to give myself a challenge in writing. It's just so much more exciting, so much more interesting to describe smell or olfaction or your olfactory senses. And then I realized as I was writing my book that it's also a metaphor, a good metaphor for things that are so pervasive, but things that, seep into your skin, into your life, but you have no control over, that you just have to live with. And, I realized that the book, of course, when you read it, I hope you will understand that it's also talking about things that are so systemic and things that are seemingly made natural but are not natural. They're made natural because of power structures, because of history, and, colonization and actions that individuals take. So I wanted to play with that kind of metaphor as well in the book.
Yeah, I like this idea very much because I just thought about it. I've been traveling a bit in the Philippines, and when you come to Manila, it smells completely different than Davao. Yeah, and I don't know, is it about the food? Where does come? Yeah, but we'll have this experience with the food later on, so we can try to find out where the food comes from, which region. But then again, I like this idea that you have these multi-layered things. Yeah, that you have these interview situations. Then you have the olfaction thing, which is another layer of diversity comes in. But again, we heard about the 135 languages. You're using these different languages and also regional dialects. Yeah, it's all interwoven in your book. But how do you get through this? How do you navigate, actually?
Yes, again, that was a challenge that I wanted to give myself, but also, in reality, that's how Filipinos speak and, interact with each other. It's never with just the one language. And even, I was also, toying with the notion of writing a Philippine language, but writing also in translation and writing it as though it were a foreign language because of, our language diversity. It was really important for me to kind of force readers to read words that they're not familiar with, to force them to listen to voices that they don't normally hear, and also to force them to acknowledge that these voices, these words, these languages, these vocabularies exist because the book is about asking and exploring the question of who gets to tell their story and in what way should the story be told, who gives people the right over who can speak and who cannot. So the language itself is already an issue, but it's also a metaphor in the book. And I hope, again, that's something that people will identify with. Thank you.
Yeah, this must have been quite a challenge for your translator again. So you have to translate, yeah, you have to bring the voices together. And then the German translator, I have to ask, this must be an issue, yeah, 135 languages. So you have to translate from one language into another in the Philippines. Then probably most of it gets translated into English, and then from English it goes into other languages, because how many translators would we have from Tagalog into German? I wouldn't dare to think. 2? Yeah? Yeah, just 1, yeah? And for the other languages, it must be even more difficult.
I mean, that's why I really appreciate the time, the effort that the NBDB, the Philippine government, and my translators took to work on the book. It was an interesting process, and I really appreciated how they involved me in the process. Every now and then they would consult me and ask me to clarify, give them more insight on the use of a particular word, and even the use of some idiomatic phrases in English, because Filipinos use English in a very specific way as well. So it was a fun process for me, but I'm sure it was difficult for the translators.
I really do believe you have to admire translators, what they are doing. And I don't think artificial intelligence will ever be able to understand what's happening. I just had to mention it. No discussion without artificial intelligence nowadays. But one last question, Daryll. You work for an NGO. You seem to be quite a political person. Yeah? When you write your book, you think you can change the world by writing? It's an evil question. I'm sorry for that.
I don't think there is any one book that can change the world. I mean, Jose Rizal wrote 2 books and then he had to die for things to change, right? I want writers to live, to tell the tale. That's, for me, that's really important, that people are able to live and people are allowed to tell their stories. And that's why, being reminded of the work of journalists, for me, is very moving, because I feel very small, to be honest. I feel very insignificant when I am reminded of the work that very brave people are doing out there. And that's why I don't think I try to be political or apolitical. I just am. And I think any writer, all writers are political, all writers have politics. I don't have any illusions that my book will change the world or will influence policy making or what have you, but I have hopes, and I dream, like any writer, to be read by as many people as possible, and for the book to encourage people to ask questions. I think that's what I want to do, really, to help people ask questions.
Maybe it really was a stupid question, but I loved your answer. Yeah, because writers have to live, yeah? And that's an important, and you can choose many lives, but you have to look into many lives before, and that you can do by reading. Yeah, so I think reading novels, poems, open up new worlds, yeah, and this is what you're doing. Thank you for that. Yeah, Jay, you're using words, but also graphics, for your work. You've chosen to look back in history, and I think your book came from a film documentary, which you've been doing. Maybe you can elaborate a bit about that as well.
Okay. Alandal was born out of the research that I did for a documentary film that I produced in 2013. There were accounts of... so the documentary film that I made is about the history and culture of the Filipino martial arts. What we call arnis, some call eskrima or kali. There are historical accounts of... within the Christianized Visayan Islands in the 1600s, of frequently encountering raids from certain Bangsamoro tribes in Sulu. So these are the pirates of the Sulu Sea, who would frequently raid the Visayan Islands. And the martial art practiced by the Bangsamoro people is known as silat, which is a combination of Chinese Kung Fu, because of their contact with Chinese traders, and also their indigenous fighting styles. And my imagination was triggered just by the thought of a small army of silat fighting raiders encountering a militia of Visayans who, together with their indigenous sword fighting knowledge, also were trained in a Spanish-style militia to respond to these raids. So I was just imagining these scenes, and out of that, I created this fiction that became Alandal.
For me, it was also quite an experience to browse, to read through the book. Yeah, it's black and white. Yeah, which is also some of the nicest people I met in my life are coming from the Philippines. And on the other hand, you're such big fighters. How does this go together? The black and white, the both sides of your people.
I think when you know that you have the power to destroy, you have the power to create. And the discipline of knowing what you are capable of is what makes you a better human being.
This is very philosophical.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what I also found out, the graphic novel takes place on the island of Mindanao. Yeah, and there's a very strong oral tradition.
Yes.
Yeah, so you have to listen to many stories. And
yes.
Are these part of your narrative or narration in here? These oral stories? Is there a tradition where you come from?
I wrote this story coming from the martial arts history perspective. So I did not use any of the traditional stories of the people of Sulu and Mindanao. I think their stories are best told by them, whereas I, as a tourist of history, I still consider myself a tourist because I'm no expert. I'm just insufferably curious. So this fiction was created outside of the tradition of storytelling of Mindanao and Sulu. This is a fiction that wrote itself in my head when I was producing that martial arts documentary.
Yeah. I like this tourist of history. Yeah, this fits perfectly what you said about the writer has to live. Yeah, so you can experience many different things. But you had the illustrator Alex Nino working with you,
Yes.
and I think I read in the book you had to go to California to meet him. He's not living in the Philippines, or
Yes, Alex Nino lives in California, somewhere north of Los Angeles. um, uh, he and I worked together on a short story. I wrote a short story, and he illustrated 12 scenes from that story. So it just so happened that I was in the U.S. on business, and I went there to pick up the original artwork for that short story. And it was at that moment when I told him, I have this idea for a comic book. So I told him what you see in the first few pages here is the prologue. That's all I had in my head. There's no real story yet. But he was listening to me intently, and after that informal pitch, he said, "Okay, let's do your comic book while I'm still alive."
he's in his 80s. Yeah,
And now he's turning 85
yeah.
in May.
But you're planning a second volume, aren't you?
Well, I have a second volume, but Alex Nino said that this is his final,
Yeah.
his retirement piece. I basically pulled him out of retirement to make a retirement piece.
But this is wonderful. And I also read that he just wanted a storyline. He didn't want. Oh, am I getting too? Yeah, I speed up. No, just two last questions because I'm really interested in that.
Okay.
He just needed a storyline. Weren't you scared to hell what you would get as a result? Since he didn't have the whole text, nothing.
I was told that this method of working, where the writer basically just gives a synopsis to the artist, and the artist has total reign over the visuals. I was told that was the way Stan Lee worked with his co-creators. So it was called the Marvel style. Right? I didn't know that at the time, but when he gave me those conditions that he would have 100% autonomy over the visuals, I understood this is where my improvisational training kicked in, where I offered him a synopsis. He agrees and reacts to it, and then offers me something back, to which I will agree and react, and that's the process.
Jay, what's next for you? You work in so many different fields.
I have 3 new stories coming up.
As graphic novels?
As graphic novels, yes.
Okay, excellent.
Yes.
So I hope we get them soon here in Germany as well.
Yes.
Just one last question. Ines is pushing me, I can tell. Yeah, maybe she's waiting for the food, I don't know. It's a question for both of you. What makes Filipino literature, graphic novels, whatever, unique? Why does the world has to look into it?
Uniqueness in literature will come from the perspective of the author. We can write romance stories, we can write historical fiction, we can write historical biographies and such, but the perspective of the author is what affects the entire piece.
So it's not being Filipino, but it's being a thinking person in the Philippines.
and you just happen to be Filipino.
Yeah. Okay. What's your perspective on that?
He just stole my answer, but okay, I want to say that first of all, my book and Jay's book, they're not representative. I don't think I can claim to be representative of Philippine literature, as Karina has shown you earlier. The literature and the people, the voices, the languages are so diverse, and I think it's that diversity that makes us different, that makes us unique. But and also because we are a product of our history and our current situation. And I think any book that comes out of a situation or an environment like that will always be unique. But also because I'm apparently writing climate fiction, and climate is such it's a global issue. Fiction coming from countries like ours become a way for local peoples to be part of a global conversation. And I think the uniqueness of the local people's voices is important not only for producing literature, but for contributing to a very important conversation. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much. All what's left for me is to get your signings in my books. I really admire your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.